Well, we welcome you back to the Heart2Hartley podcast. I'm Adam Dragoon.
I'm Albert Hartley.
And we're glad you're here with us. We hope that you've enjoyed our podcast episodes so far. We sure have enjoyed producing them. And we're back again today for our next podcast episode. And today, before we get into the topics, I wanted to share with the audience and also with you, Albert. You haven't heard these yet. I wanted to share some statistics and some numbers that we have generated so far for our listening audience. So first thing I want to share with you is the number of downloads. So podcast downloads. This is the number of times the show has been downloaded to play either on mobile devices or even through the website. So that number is 28. So wow. Since we've launched the podcast, that was just a couple weeks ago, that's been heard at least 28 times in that way. Then we also have the podcast episodes up on YouTube for viewing there. And our watch time since we launched our YouTube channel is 104 minutes of watch time on YouTube.
Is that a long time for YouTube?
That's pretty good for the amount of time we've been up there. That means 46 times somebody has pushed the play button on our YouTube page. And I know that you were excited when I shared this with you.
Yes,
that since we we're trying to generate some ad revenue from our YouTube site, we were able to generate exactly 20 cents.
That's huge for me. You don't understand. I used to cut grass and work construction. To make 20 cents off some ad revenue, never would have thought I'd do it. So I'm excited about the 20 cents.
Yes, here we are. Look at us rolling in it.
Yes.
All right. And then the other numbers I wanted to share quickly is from our website. So we have the heart2hartley.com website that's up and running, and it's getting bigger and bigger every day. We're going to be adding a lot more content there. But since we launched the website about a month ago, we have had 228 unique visitors to the website. That's a huge number. And of the 228, we've had almost 500 page views. So that means each person is clicking around a few times on the website. So all of that to say, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being curious. Thank you for checking out the content here on the Heart2Hartley podcast and the Heart2Hartley website and everything that we're presenting. We're really excited about some new products that are going to be up and running here in just about a week or two. So we're going to talk about those later. But for now, we want to jump right into today's topic. And for that, I'd like to give the ball over to Mr. Hartley. What do we got for us today?
All right. So I wanted to take a different approach today and move in a direction that I think is relevant. So I read a lot of newspapers, and I started this in high school. And this is going to shock everybody, but I probably was a nerd in high school. No, let me just take that probably out. I was a nerd in high school, but I played sports. But one of the things that I did in high school was extemporaneous speaking. I actually competed in extemporaneous speaking. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. So, but when you're nerding out at that level, you have to read current events magazines and all kinds of newspapers. Well, that has carried me over into my adulthood. And I found a really interesting article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. And I want to talk about this article in the context of authority. And one of the things that's happening in our culture that I think is we have to be very cautious of, which is what I call comparative analysis. Okay? Comparative analysis is where you take two things and you try to find commonality between them or the differences, okay? And we see a lot of this now in what I consider to be the globalization of culture.
Okay.
All right. And the danger in that is, and I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. The danger of that is to assume that, number one, the United States has accurate policies on everything.
Right.
Okay. Number two, it's also to assume that everybody's kind of like us and we're like everybody. Okay? That assumption is grossly inadequate. Mm-hmm. Our challenges and what we have been responsible for are completely unique. Okay?
Okay.
Let me give you just a big example. World War II.
Okay.
Okay? It is a rare culture that destroys everything and then helps to rebuild what they've destroyed.
Yeah, unique.
That doesn't happen, okay? We've done that in our own Civil War in the period of Reconstruction. Now, you can talk about, well, it's good or bad or whatever, but that happened, okay? And when we entered World War I and World War II, we sacrificed, those generations sacrificed to help rebuild the world,
Mm-hmm.
Which is one of the reasons why when you go to France, they're still happy to see us.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Now, some countries are not happy to see us, but what I'm saying all that to say that in an age of global terrorism, which we're happening now, okay, what happened in France, what happened in Charlie Hebdo, what happened in Myanmar, what happened in
San Bernardino,
we're seeing other cultures being exported to our culture.
Right.
And we're trying to figure out how to react to the world. Okay, and I read this article in the New York Times about how this particular Belgian law may have aided the escape of the Paris terrorist organizer.
Okay.
So when I read it, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. The law says that you cannot do any type of police raid between the hours of 9 p.m.
No.
Yeah, no. Listen to me. From 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., to preserve the family privacy.
Wow.
And the actual term they use, the law prohibits raids on private homes between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. unless the person living there invites the authorities to enter.
Really?
Or has been directly observed committing a crime. Now, what's interesting about that to me is, number one, you say, please come into our home. We value the fact that you're here. We're committing a crime. Enter, please. Okay? Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay? Secondly, there's a really interesting concept of authority. Okay? And globalization that I want to talk about. In certain countries, they value privacy above all things.
Right.
Well, we value our privacy, but we're willing to compromise that for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
It is absurd to think that you cannot raid a home between 9 and 5 a.m. in order to issue a warrant.
Right.
That's absurd. But it's not absurd for a country of 11 million people. Okay? In a country of 300 million people, and uniquely our country, okay, I think we happen to think, oh, everybody's like us.
Right.
They're not.
That's right.
Because they don't have our unique challenges, nor do they have our unique responsibilities. So that law allowed a terrorist who killed hundreds of people to terrorize a nation, by the way, which has resulted in the compromise of their civil rights, a declaration of martial law for 3 months,
Yeah.
the restriction of the press, the restriction of civil liberties, and this person got away in Belgium, and by the way, they also had Belgium connections to the San Bernardino terrorists.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Because there's a passport situation there that they've allowed some openness, because most people don't understand how the European Union works. You don't have to have a passport in the European Union to travel between countries. Americans, when they hear that, they say, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you're talking about. Well, because they're an open society. Okay. So what I found interesting about that law is they were restricted from going into this particular dwelling, and they knew the person was in there, and they believed, the speculation was, he actually escaped between the hours of 9 and 5 a.m. Now, that poses a problem for us as a country, because what we want to do, and I think partly, and not to be political, but our administration, our leaders currently think that if we play by a certain set of rules, everybody else will too.
Right. If
we negotiate Iran will play like we play. If we talk to China, they will play like we play. Well, they're not our country. They don't have our Constitution. And more importantly, they don't have our people.
That's right.
So they don't have a heterogeneous society. And what I mean by that is the diversity in this country is insane.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
I mean, it's absolutely insane. I mean, you can go into any restaurant, any store, any hospital, and you have races, religions, and creeds working with each other. That doesn't happen in other countries.
It does not, no.
It is a rarity. So when they say, well, Belgium's involved with this, they can't be responsible for our stuff. Okay. So that made me think this law is very fascinating, because I can see them at the storage step. I'm like, 9 o'clock. Oh, okay, we got to go. Sorry.
Barney Fife.
Right. Like, well, hey, here's a note. We'll be back at 5.
Right.
That's bizarre. Now, I value the idea, right? But I think the American culture sees that and seems to be absurd, as if crime or terrorism takes a break. This goes back to a significant idea of authority, okay? The actual idea of having authority over something means you have to make decisions. When I tell people, if you study American history, Lincoln, he suspended civil rights in this country. They're like, what are you talking about? Most people don't understand that. I'm not saying I was for that, but based on what was going on at the time, because there was a civil war, he had to control certain things. That was the decision he had to make.
Right.
He also had the decision not to continue holding that authority. He relinquished it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe that's the idea that I want to talk about a little more in depth, the idea of relinquishing authority. Washington relinquished authority. They wanted to make him president for life.
That's right.
And he said, absolutely not. He could have.
Yep. He could have been King George.
Sure, he could have. And he could have even masked it in some sort of, meritocracy. Like, hey, I'm here, but I'm just getting the country stable. But that he didn't. He believed in the authority of the Constitution and of law. I think what's happening is when this idea that we're all globally connected, and we may be technologically connected, but I would find it interesting if an American female would go to the Middle East and expect to be treated like an American female.
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
That's right.
And we have to ask ourselves, what part of cultures are we going to adopt? Because you don't pick and choose culture, right? You assimilate, you change, you absorb. And so if you want to know what killed the Cold War, right? Some of our listeners are probably too young to even know what that is, but it was our culture.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
They put on a pair of Levi's in the East Block of Berlin. They were like, these jeans fit really nice. Yeah. These are nice jeans. How do we get more jeans? Well, you got to go to the West. I like the West.
Right.
Like, well, no, it's about politics. No, it was about the jeans. It was about the choices.
Yeah.
And with choices come responsibility.
Yeah.
And what's happened in our culture, I think you see, Adam, this idea of authority without responsibility.
Mm.
And so that's a hot topic for me. And when I hear Belgium saying we're going to keep it from 9 to 5, that is complete authority being abdicated to somebody without the responsibility of protecting other people.
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Yep.
They've abdicated to your privacy rights now can be impinging on somebody else because we're going to let this person go because we don't want to violate the privacy of some people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in order to protect the greater people, sometimes you have to compromise those things. And I found it fascinating that there was actually in the article discussions with the Americans like, sorry, we can't do that. And France was livid.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? So now you have the sovereign of Belgium and the sovereignty of France fighting it out.
Yeah.
And they were like, sorry. And so they're trying to get a law through Parliament in Belgium to get it changed. And you're talking two completely different countries, right? Mm. France is huge. Belgium's we have 11 million people in New York City.
Yeah. A lot more, I think.
Yeah. So think about that. They're dominating. Their laws are dominating or dictating global policy.
Mm-hmm.
When did that become the case, right? It's just this weird inversion of we're going to have a lot of authority, but little responsibility. Okay? And we see this in a variety of things now that's happened in our culture, okay, where Congress takes a huge responsibility, right? And they say, hey, we're responsible for these things, but they don't want to lead,
right?
Okay? But they exert authority. If the Affordable Care Act, that's a perfect example. Mm-hmm. They've taken authority over something that was typically not in their realm, and they've imposed it upon us. That's domination.
Mm-hmm.
The frustration for me is how do we come up with a rhetoric that makes sense in order for people to function? And I think we have to have some litmus tests, okay? So quickly. Number one, in your own home, if someone is asserting an opinion without responsibility, that opinion is not worth much. And everybody says, well, I'm entitled to my opinion. You might be, but you're not entitled to authority with that opinion. Because in order to have authority, you should have responsibility.
Okay.
Let me flesh that out.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're not paying bills, you may have an opinion on how to spend the money, but you're not responsible for the money. So you should not have authority over how to spend the money since you're not responsible to make the money.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
For example, another example could be your children. they have the right to have an opinion
Mm-hmm.
because they're human beings and they have the right to formulate one. What they don't have, and what's happened in our culture, is that now they've been given authority.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I see this all the time. What would you like to do? Well, stop. They're children. What they like to do is irrelevant.
Yeah.
But by asking that question, what you've created is an egalitarian system, which is inappropriate to rearing kids.
It sure is. Yep.
And so that continues. So when you're in the classroom and you're trying to assert authority by teaching, which requires authority, the kids are like, I don't know why I don't need to listen to you.
Yeah.
I have an opinion of this. You're ignorant.
Yeah.
Your opinion is not relevant. But because they believe that their thoughts have responsibility attached to them, which they do not, they don't understand why they should be respectful of authority.
That's very true.
Okay?
Yep.
So they've been given authority without responsibility. So what does that create? You devalue it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how to earn it.
That's right.
You don't know how to keep it.
That's right.
And more importantly, you don't know when to relinquish it.
Mm.
And that's the difference between someone like Washington and the rest of us.
Yeah.
Because he earned it.
Mm-hmm.
He sacrificed. He took it with responsibility and humility. And then he relinquished it because he knew what it would do if he kept it.
Yeah.
That's a great lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So when Belgium says, sorry, you can't go get someone who killed your people because we're valuing the privacy of our individual citizens more than the criminal act,
Mm-hmm.
they've given authority to the citizen who's not responsible to anyone else.
That's right.
And that's a defective situation.
Totally.
But we're seeing it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think this starts really early. My wife read an article a couple years ago and brought it to my attention, and was a really, really powerful, very simple but powerful article about giving children choices. Mm-hmm. And the mistake many parents will make is, what do you want for breakfast, Johnny? And just leave it open-ended like that. And they said, depending on how old your child is, they don't need to choose. You just make breakfast for them and say, here's your breakfast. And then when they get a little bit older, you can ask them, would you like pancakes or would you like waffles? You give them options, but you don't just leave open-ended, because that engenders that, like you were saying, it trains a child to think that they can get whatever they want.
Well, and also what it does, it makes them adults.
Yeah.
They're not adults.
They can't handle that choice making.
Right. For example, the sexualization of children is insane to me.
Right.
I don't understand it. And we have a major problem in our culture with the sexualization of children. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because we give them authority over things that are adult decisions.
That's right.
You're not wearing that. What do you want to wear? No, you're not wearing that. Part of that is because they're not responsible for earning the stuff that they're going to put on their body.
Right.
If they want to be adults, then there's a series of responsibilities that come with being an adult. Mm-hmm. Voting.
Yep.
Right. Educating yourself. Mm-hmm. Income. Right. So when you start talking to a child and say, well, what do you want? Those are decisions and questions for people who are responsible for themselves.
Right.
If I go to a movie theater, I get to choose which movie I see because I'm paying.
That's right.
To go, right? If a child says, I want to go see this, there's nothing inherently wrong with that as long as that's the parameter, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, we were going to go to a movie. There's these 3 movies. Which of the 3 would you like to see? When you start having dictation, mm-hmm. that's where the problem comes in, because then you don't know how to turn off adulthood. So one of the things in our house we talked about a lot is identifying, and this is another tip, identifying what's an adult decision. Okay? A curfew is an adult decision. You don't get to determine when you get in or how long you're out. Those are self-determining issues that only when you're an adult you can do.
Right.
Secondly, identifying if a decision or the response to someone else is an adult or a child decision. Mm-hmm. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Fixing something for a child can be detrimental to them. Mm. Making their choice for them, okay, let's say in a moral context, okay? And I have a lot of Christian friends, and they want to limit the choices when it comes to morality. Okay? Well, I get that at a certain age. But when you're 13 and you've sanitized the world, you basically enabled the child to not understand the reasoning for not choosing a bad thing. Right? So when we talk to our girls about sexuality, right? We talk to them about your sexuality is an adult decision. I'm not going to tell you that it's evil because it's not in the right context. Okay? What I am going to tell you is that if you start participating in an activity that's an adult, you have adult consequences. I have girls. One of the adult consequences, the most main one, is pregnancy.
That's right.
The other one is emotional investment. Because sexuality carries with it an emotional investment. And I'm not talking about the morality of before or after marriage. That's a conversation for parents. But what I am saying is the actual physical act of sexual activity requires you to invest or divest yourself of the emotional intelligence that it takes to understand what you're doing. And I have friends who are men who have continued to acting out sexually outside the bonds of marriage and have nothing left for their spouses when they finally get married.
Right.
It's become so devoid of any type of investment. So it's a mile long and a shallow deep. It's just an inch deep. It's just very bad for them. So children, when you talk to, so here's the typical thing with sex, right? You tell kids, don't have sex. Well, that runs contrary, frankly, to every hormonal and growth pattern of a child.
Sure.
Right? What do boys meet their sexual peak at 18 or some crazy thing like that? So you're telling them don't do, and every urge they have is the exact opposite. Their curiosity, their interactions. So the question really should be, are you an authority over that part of your life? And are you willing to accept the responsibility? So that's a different context. So, for example, if a young lady gets pregnant before she's supposed to, and you celebrate that to some degree, what you're celebrating her is living a false life. So these shows like Teen Mom, well, first of all, they're not moms. They're teenagers.
Right.
Celebrating that is a sort of weird thing because you're celebrating authority with fake responsibility because you cannot be responsible for another human being when you're already the same level. That's like putting all the players on the field and saying, all right, coach yourselves. But that's what we want. Right? Well, that's because we as human beings are really basically selfish. It ultimately comes down to a selfish perspective. I don't want to submit myself to authority. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's killing civilized society is the refusal to recognize any authority. And it starts so early with so many young people who grow up without a strong authority in their home. And then that transfers to how they treat each other on the playground. That transfers to how they learn in the classroom. It can't, like you said, you can't receive from a teacher who doesn't have any authority. And then that, if it turns for the worse, the ultimate, the only authority left is the police.
And let's not let the people in authority off the hook either.
Right.
Because if you're in this mindset that the only reason I have authority is because I'm in a position of authority, then you're ignoring credibility. And that's what's happening now. I think it's interesting when I see on the news police officers yelling and screaming and fighting back. What are you doing? You're not at the same level. You should not be reacting with the same response as someone who's out of control. So what's happening is this whole nasty egalitarianism. It's really ugly. When a police officer shows up on the scene, there used to be a time where that was a level of authority. They would assume peace would be enforced. What's happening now, which is weird because you see these really random things, it seems like they're reacting in order to show force.
Right. Yeah.
Because what's happening is there's no credibility with the authority. So, and I think that comes from a culture where we're not looking at the credibility of authority. We're saying, oh, well, I'm in this position because I have money. Well, first of all, a lot of people have money who have no authority. A lot of people have money who have no responsibility. And a lot of people have money who are not credible. Okay? The term was class. All right? That class is not relative to money.
Yeah.
So I think when we read something like a Belgian law and we say, that's just weird. Well, it's this sort of high end or the far end example of what happens when you've substituted authority without responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I would expect a coach and a team to assert authority, not through yelling or screaming, but through credibility and responsibility.
Right.
And that also, I think, leads to a lot of inappropriate relationships between adults and young people.
Sure does. Yep.
You see this in churches. You see this in schools. Why in the world would a teacher date a student?
Yeah.
It's bizarre. Oh, I get it, because they're of the same level.
That's right. Yep.
And so we have to be careful in positions of leadership to make sure that the people who are in authority act with authority and credibility and responsibility. So when I see that as a 3-part process. Are you in authority? Do you have responsibility that basically legitimizes that authority? And if you use that authority and responsibility in a way that gives you credibility, those 3 things put together really help to produce a really stable situation. Okay? Let me give you another example. I don't want to go on too long, but the civil rights movement in the 60s, right? It's a perfect example. Martin Luther King realized, hey, this is an illegitimate government because they are imposing upon us the most absurd type of segregation. It's absurd. So his response was, we will show their absurdity through nonviolence.
Yeah.
So we will go into the counter, sit at the counter, and they will act in a way to assert their authority, and they will become incredible. Okay? Their lack of credibility will just scream. And ultimately, that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, that took the sacrifice of lots of people.
That's right.
But that's a far cry from asserting your authority, okay? And it's also different than demanding respect. See, there's a big difference.
Absolutely.
So when you assert your authority through quiet humility, the absurdity of the other side comes quite clear. And change is affected by that. Now, you can also change other people by force, which I think in our culture is what's happening, right? So someone says something stupid, there's a reaction, that person has to resign. You have to do something.
Make demands, yeah.
Right. So what ends up happening is there's no thought process in that. So this pendulum swings so fast that there's no process of saying, well, wait a second, is that a legitimate response?
Mm-hmm.
Have we made no bounds for people who make mistakes and can change?
It becomes a very emotional response.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you've done there is you don't have any responsibility when your emotions are in play, right? You can just say whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
Okay? And this pendulum swinging creates conflict in our society. And I think ultimately, people who are in authority have to be responsible. Okay? And I think people who are lacking authority need to earn credibility and responsibility in order to say, I have a legitimate place now. I've earned my right to say with what I want to say and to act with what I want to act with a level of authority because I've earned it.
Okay.
We're skipping those steps.
Yeah. Trying to.
How do you feel? I don't care how you feel. Right? One of the earliest things I had to do when I became a father was to realize my child's happiness wasn't my priority. It hurts me when they're upset. It pains me when they're not happy. But joy comes from your responsibilities. Joy comes from knowing you've completed and you're a good citizen.
Yeah.
Happiness is fleeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm responsible for their happiness, then I'm constantly running around.
That's right.
If I'm responsible for their joy, in the midst of a tragedy, they will be able to sustain themselves. And that's because they recognize, wait, I have the credibility to be here. I'm a functioning person who can take the responsibility of the moment, and I'm not taking on authority that should be somebody else's. And I'm prepared to move forward. And I think that's a really powerful lesson in our culture when everybody's trying to be everything to everyone. And I think ultimately we have to, as adults, be more adult.
Yeah. And realize what that is.
Exactly.
And I think one of the, just to close this up, is I think that we have so very few good examples of what you're talking about, of good, humble authority in our culture. that it's really hard to come by. I want to ask your opinion on one thing, and then we'll close up this time. I read a book by Malcolm Gladwell. You ever read anything by him?
All his stuff.
Oh, fantastic. So the last one about David and Goliath, he kind of tackled this a little bit. And one thing that stuck with me was he talked about legitimate authority. Mm-hmm. And he said, if you want to have a legitimate authority, you've got to have three things. Number one, ability to listen and to really hear people, like what we talked about in our last podcast. There's got to be predictability, which means people know what you're going to do. And the third thing is consistency. And those three things together, he says, will give you the platform for legitimate authority.
Yeah, I think that's really great. You know, I think about David and Goliath, and I think about David, right? So most people may not realize this, but before he slew the giant, so he slew Goliath, Saul tried to put him into armor like everybody else. Yeah. And he's wearing this stuff. He's like a little kid. He's like, man, this is just not working for me. Like, I can't do it. And what I love about that picture, right, is that he's trying to cloak him with some sort of authority, right? Like the armor of a soldier would have made David something unique. Right. And that is just so, think about if he'd gone in there with this armor that didn't fit, and it's just, it doesn't work.
That's right.
And so I think there's a great principle that Gladwell's putting forth, and if we apply those to every little thing, and one of the things I think is important is to ask yourself, is this an adult question that needs to be answered by adults? Or can I give authority to someone who's not in a position of responsibility here? Mm-hmm. What does that look like? And then we can have a conversation about credibility at that point. Mm-hmm.
Very good. All right, we're gonna end this session, and we wanted to ask you to do a couple of things for us. We want to ask you to follow us on our social websites. We've got Facebook and Twitter. Everything is facebook.com/Heart2Hartley, and then twitter.com/Heart2Hartley. Also on Instagram, Heart2Hartley. We'd ask you to follow us on all three of those. We would also love to have you give us a rating and a review in iTunes, and also to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of those things would really help us to get the word out. Please let people know. Maybe there's somebody that you know that would benefit from this conversation. Why don't you send it to them? Why don't you send them an email or a text message? And we would really appreciate that. So for now, we'd like to say goodbye. I'm Adam Dragoon.
I'm Albert Hartley.
And thank you for listening to Heart2Hartley podcast. Hey there, this is Adam from the Heart2Hartley podcast. Wanted to just give you a quick update about something that we are launching very soon. Albert Hartley has recorded some very powerful instructional videos that we're going to be releasing on Vimeo. These are going to be on-demand videos, and what that means is you'll be able to rent or buy them either separately or as a total package. And so we're getting very, very excited about this product. We think that this will be useful for so many people in so many different scenarios. And so we want to ask you to begin taking a look at that. If you will go to our website, heart2hartley.com, and you look over on the top right side of that page, you'll find a link for all these instructional videos. And so these are going to be launching. They're going to be available for pre-order, which means if you purchase them now, you can get a great price. You're going to get them at a deep discount, much cheaper than they will be after we release them. Big release day is going to be January 15th. And so keep that in mind. We'd ask you to go check out our website, heart2hartley.com. And again, the promotional videos are going to be up in the top right-hand corner of the page. And so if you would check those out, check out our promotional price. It is only available in this pre-order period. So we want to ask you to go check those out, and we would appreciate your support. Thanks again from Heart2Hartley Podcast.